Why do habits change destiny? How can small daily habits lead to monumental shifts in one's life and future success? What are the key strategies to build good habits and break bad ones? Welcome to Daily Book Dive. Today, I will interpret the book Atomic Habits with the subtitle How to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones. How important are habits to a person? The author of this book, James Clear, wrote this book because he genuinely experienced the power of habits. It can be said that habits helped him break free from life's difficulties. In high school, Clear was hit in the face with a baseball bat, right between his eyes. The strong impact fractured several facial bones and caused severe brain swelling. After the surgery, he suffered from impaired vision and intermittent seizures. You should know that Clear had been playing baseball since he was 4 years old, and playing in professional baseball tournaments had always been his dream. But this injury prevented him from training for a long time, and he was eventually removed from the school team. Later, in college, he resumed playing baseball and was selected for the ESPN Academic All-America team, of which only 33 athletes nationwide were chosen, and Clear was one of them. Upon graduation, he received the University President's Medal, the highest honor given to students by his university. Why was he able to stand up again after such a setback? The answer lies in habits. And for this reason, he wrote this book, hoping to share his methods for cultivating habits with more people, allowing them to gain strength from their habits. He also founded the Habits Academy, which has more than 10,000 graduates, including business managers, teachers, and more. Many Fortune 500 companies also send employees to his academy for training. Once we understand the importance of habits, how do we change them? This might be a question that concerns many people. When it comes to this, you may initially think of using sheer willpower. But the author believes that changing habits isn't as hard as we imagine. We struggle to change not because we lack willpower, but because we're using the wrong method. Many people want to develop habits and often focus on their goals. For instance, when trying to cultivate a reading habit, many people will set a reading plan, like reading a certain number of pages or for a certain duration each day, but they give up after a few days. What is more effective then? The author says that to change habits, you should focus not on the goal but on the identity, in simple terms, who you want to become. So, to cultivate a reading habit, the more effective way is not to set a reading plan, but to become a person who loves to read. Once you change your perception of your identity, you'll act accordingly, reading more books to reinforce your identity. So, to change habits, you should start from identity, not from goals. How exactly should we change? The author gives us 2 suggestions. First, start with small habits. Second, establish a 4-step model for cultivating habits, namely cue, craving, response, and reward. Next, I'll break down this book, Atomic Habits, into 2 parts. In the first part, we'll talk about the author's first suggestion: why are small habits important? In the second part, we'll focus on the 4-step model for changing habits presented in the book. Part 1. Let's first discuss why small habits are important. We all know that habits are important, but often, we only notice the obvious big habits and overlook the inconspicuous small habits, thinking they don't have much impact on us. For example, most people want to develop the habit of waking up early, so they'll set a big goal right from the start, like getting up at 6 a.m., regardless of what time they went to bed the night before. But few people say that their goal is to wake up just 5 minutes earlier than yesterday and gradually reach the goal of getting up at 6 a.m. It's challenging for someone who regularly wakes up at 8 or 9 to suddenly switch to waking up at 6 a.m. They might resolve to put their phone down by 11 p.m., but often they can't fall asleep and might manage to get up early for 2 or 3 days. But by the fourth day, they wake up and it's already past 8 a.m. again. However, if you approach it differently and decide to wake up 5 minutes earlier each day, you'll find this much easier. Sleep 5 minutes earlier the first day, wake up 5 minutes earlier the second day, and in a few weeks, waking up at 6 a.m. won't be that hard. We've all heard the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day, but when we get down to business, we always have this delusion that we can accomplish something in one go. For instance, if you want to lose weight, you might think of just skipping dinner altogether. If you want to write a book, you might set a goal to write 10,000 words a day, about 1,000 words an hour, which doesn't seem impossible. You keep putting pressure on yourself, trying to make visible changes to feel like you're moving closer to success. But this approach usually doesn't last. Therefore, the author says that we always focus on significant moments of change and ignore the subtle, invisible changes behind them. And we often underestimate the power of time. The author gives an example. In 2003, Dave Brailsford was hired as the performance director of British Cycling, which manages professional cycling in the UK. At that time, British professional cyclists weren't performing well. To give you some numbers, from 1908 to 2003, nearly 100 years, British cyclists won only one gold medal in the Olympics. Their performance in the Tour de France was even worse. In its 110-year history, they hadn't won a single medal. The Tour de France is also the largest international road cycling race, held annually in the summer. But in over a century of races, British cyclists still hadn't won a single medal. However, after Brailsford became performance director, the situation changed completely. Within just 5 years, at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the British cycling team won 8 out of 14 gold medals in road and track cycling events, more than they had won in the previous 100 years. This wasn't a fluke because, 4 years later at the London Olympics, they did even better, breaking 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. Their performance in the Tour de France was equally impressive, winning all but the 2014 championship taken by Italy from 2012 to 2018. You might be curious about how they suddenly transformed and won one world championship after another. What magic training method did the coach use? Brailsford's training method is called the aggregation of marginal gains. It sounds impressive, but it boils down to seeking progress in every detail. How meticulous is it? The bike tires must be cleaned with alcohol to improve grip. Even the cyclist's clothing is carefully considered. They wear heated shorts to keep their muscles at the optimal temperature during riding. To reduce wind resistance during cycling, they experimented with various fabrics and finally chose the best one. They even painted the inside of their truck white to spot dust better. Dust in a truck is normal, but if it gets on the bikes, it can affect their performance. Every part of these bikes is finely tuned, and any slight change can lower the bike's optimal performance, ultimately affecting the cyclist's results. Even these seemingly trivial details were given due attention by the team. The result, as we know, is that improving every little detail helped this obscure British team win one victory after another. As you can see, the impact of each minor improvement is far greater than we imagine. Why is that? If you think carefully, you'll realize that our lives aren't a series of scattered points, but an upward curve. Success or failure seems to occur at a particular moment, at a point. But it started accumulating long before. One day, the time comes and it appears before you. The author also gives a metaphor in the book, saying that this process is like adjusting an airplane's flight path. Imagine flying a plane from Los Angeles. If you adjust the plane's nose southward by just 3.5 degrees, after a few hours, you'll land not in New York but in Washington, a difference of 360 kilometers. Even though we know how important small habits are, actually putting them into practice, like developing a good habit or breaking a bad one, still seems very difficult. These habits are so small that it takes a long time before we see the results. We may think that even if I deposit 1,000 yuan in the bank every month, I won't become a millionaire, so I'd rather spend it. Waking up early for 3 days straight won't immediately get me promoted and a raise. And not playing with my phone before bed tonight and reading for half an hour won't immediately make me a well-read person. When we can't see immediate feedback, we lose the motivation to act. And even if we manage to persevere for a while but still don't see any changes, it can be even more disheartening, leading us to doubt whether our efforts are in vain and whether it's meaningful to keep going. So, how can we more effectively develop small habits? The author suggests that the better way to change habits isn't to set goals, but to focus on the system. This sounds a bit abstract, so let's give an example. Suppose you're an entrepreneur and your goal is to make a profit. The system includes testing product ideas, hiring employees, and marketing. If you do these things well, you'll probably make a profit, achieving the goal. What happens if you only set goals? You'll find it's still challenging to develop habits. For instance, in school, you might have set a final exam score goal to get yourself to study hard daily. To stick to your fitness goals, you might have set a goal to run on the treadmill for 20 minutes before resting. But these goals don't help you develop the habit of studying or working out. But if we stop focusing on a single goal and instead focus on the entire system, we unknowingly stick to a habit. Because once you set a goal, you expect to achieve it and only feel happy when you do, which might take a long time. In other words, you can't feel joy from when you set the goal until you achieve it. Achieving a goal is like running a race. You only enjoy the moment of success when you reach the finish line. However, you won't keep running afterwards since the race is over and you don't need to keep trying. But when we focus on the system, it's different. With every little bit of progress, you immediately feel joy, motivating you to keep going. You may have heard of the flywheel effect. Someone even wrote a book about it called The Flywheel Effect. It says that if you want to get a wheel spinning, it will initially take some effort to push it around in the same direction. But after a while, it will start spinning and gain momentum, and you don't need to exert much effort for it to spin quickly on its own. The process of changing habits is the same. In the first few days, you have to keep pushing that wheel. But after enough time, doing this will become easier and easier. And after changing one habit after another, these seemingly trivial habits will add up, and you'll find your life will become entirely different than before. So, let's summarize. Significant changes don't happen suddenly, but gradually accumulate from those subtle, small changes. So, if you want to change your habits, it's essential not to focus on one big goal, but to pay attention to every bit of small effort. Part 2. After discussing small efforts, let's move on to the author's other suggestion, establishing a 4-step model for cultivating habits. Cue, craving, response, and reward. These 4 steps correspond to the 4 laws of behavior change, which we'll cover one by one. Step 1. Set a cue. All change stems from the gap between the current state and expectations. You only want to change it if you're dissatisfied with the current state. Recognizing this isn't difficult, but implementing it is much harder. We instinctively solve problems in familiar ways and often don't realize it because we're too familiar. If you don't deliberately adjust, your body will switch to automatic mode and handle problems the usual way. For instance, if you get up at 8 a.m. every day, you'll find that even without an alarm, you can naturally wake up around this time due to your biological clock. But if one day you need to get up early to catch a flight, you'll set multiple alarms the night before to force yourself to wake up early. A cue is like this alarm clock. It reminds you to change when you unconsciously perform automated behaviors. How exactly should you proceed? The book provides many tips, which I've summarized into 3 points. First, you need to know which habits you want to change. Only when you recognize it can you change it. The book provides a method called establishing a habit scorecard. You can make a list of your daily habits and then, for each habit, ask yourself if it's a good or bad habit. If it's a good habit, you can put a plus sign next to it. If it's a bad habit, put a minus sign. If it's something you want to keep doing, put an equal sign. On a side note, we all want to develop good habits and get rid of bad ones. But the author presents an interesting idea. Habits don't have good or bad qualities. They only vary in effectiveness. At first glance, this might seem odd. Of course, habits have good and bad qualities. Waking up early every day is a good habit, while staying up late and lying in is a bad habit. But that's not necessarily the case. People can generally be divided into larks and owls. Larks are energetic in the morning, while owls are the opposite, and they're more focused at night. If you force them to get up early, they'll feel groggy, looking like they're working hard but being inefficient and wasting time. Also, there isn't any medical evidence that early to bed and early to rise or late to bed and late to rise has a significant impact on health. Sleep quality matters more than the time you go to bed or get up. So, whether a habit is good or bad can't be generalized. The standard for judging whether a habit is good or bad boils down to one criterion: whether it makes you better. Once you know which habits to change, you can start taking action. The author says that many times, it's not that we lack motivation but a clear plan. For example, if you want to cultivate the habit of getting up early, don't just stick a "wake up early" note on your bed. Right? I will do what at what time and where. The more detailed the plan, the better. What about breaking a bad habit? You can say it out loud. For instance, if you want to quit eating junk food before eating a bag of chips, you can tell yourself, "I want to eat these chips, but they'll make me gain weight and harm my health." You might think this sounds silly, but it's scientifically backed. We know that the left brain controls language and logic. And when you say something out loud, your brain processes that information and turns your unconscious reaction into a conscious action, reminding you what you're doing. The author also advises that changing habits should be gradual. You might want to change a lot of habits, but you can't change them all at once, because our bodies rely on pathways, and following the original behavior pattern is the most effortless. Changing one habit is already increasing the body's energy consumption, so trying to change several at once might mean none will change. If you want to change several habits, one effective method is habit stacking. After cultivating one new habit, you can build on it to develop another. Because actions aren't isolated, people always try to establish connections between actions. For instance, after developing the habit of waking up early, you can sit up and meditate for 5 minutes, stacking the meditation habit on top of the early rising habit. The already formed habit acts like a cue, telling you what to do next. In this way, you won't forget the habit you want to change, and you won't need to rely on strong willpower to keep going. In addition to activating agency and making changes proactively, there is an easier way: leveraging the external environment to help you change. The author calls this method environment design. Simply put, if you want to develop good habits, try to create an environment that promotes them. If you want to break bad habits, try to separate them from the specific environment that triggers them. For instance, if you want to put your phone away before bed and develop a habit of reading before sleep, you can store your phone in your desk drawer or another room beforehand and place a few books on your nightstand. In this way, you can only read before going to bed, and with the distractions eliminated, reading will naturally become a habit. The author also emphasizes that while we can change habits, we won't forget them. That is, once a habit forms, it won't disappear, even if we replace the old habit with a new one. If the conditions are met, the original habit may still appear. Take the previous example. Even if you develop the good habit of reading before bed, if one day you put your phone on the book without realizing it, you'll likely end up playing on your phone instead of reading. This is because the brain prefers easy, simple information, and a book is much more complex than the fragmented information on a phone. After the first step of setting a cue, the next step is to take action. How can we lower the difficulty of change and make people willingly change? This requires leveraging the inner force of emotions. The author calls the second step craving, which is also the driving force behind our change. The deepest craving of people is to reduce uncertainty and obtain rewards, or simply seek pleasure and avoid pain. So, if you want to change your habits, you must make the new habit more attractive. Specifically, this means turning the good habit you want to develop into a reward and the bad habit you want to break into a loss. How do you make a habit more attractive? Consider this question: why do we feel compelled to reach for French fries or milk tea? Think back to how it felt when you ate French fries: golden on the outside, crispy when you bite into them. You naturally get this wonderful feeling. At this point, your body automatically releases a substance called dopamine, which makes you feel happy. The key to a thing's attractiveness is dopamine. When we expect pleasure and anticipate this feeling of happiness, we'll take action. And our anticipation of the reward is often stronger than the reward itself. Many times, you might have experienced this. You really like something and work hard to earn money to get it, and no matter how much you have to give, it doesn't feel tiring. But when you get it, the happiness only lasts a few days. Therefore, to make a habit more attractive, you need to turn it into something you look forward to, stimulating dopamine release. You can bind the good habit you want to develop to your preferences. Once you begin to look forward to the reward, the action won't seem so difficult. ABC, American Broadcasting Company, once used this method to cultivate viewers' habits of watching TV shows on time. How did they do this? They encouraged viewers to make popcorn and drink wine on Thursday nights, relax in front of the TV, and enjoy a pleasant evening. In this way, Thursday night TV programs became associated with the joy of popcorn and wine. To break bad habits, the principle is the same. You need to change your original mindset and recognize that giving up the bad habit won't reduce your happiness, but instead bring you longer-term happiness. For instance, to break the habit of spending money recklessly, you can remind yourself that this won't genuinely improve your quality of life and that most of the things you buy are unnecessary and only add to your financial burden. If you save that money, you won't find yourself short of money when you need it for something necessary. After taking action and developing a habit, the next step is to repeat it and make the new habit stick. How do you make persistence easier? This brings us to the third step in changing habits: response. Developing a new habit isn't a one-off, but a process of continuous repetition. The more you repeat a behavior, the deeper your brain's memory of it becomes, and this new behavior replaces your old behavior pattern, transforming into an automated response. Our brains naturally prefer solving problems in the most effortless way possible to conserve energy. This principle is called the law of least effort, and our behaviors follow it. That is, the more energy a behavior consumes, the less likely we are to do it. So, to make a habit easier to stick to, you must reduce the resistance to action as much as possible. How can you do this? The book provides two methods. The first is to prepare to be lazy in the future. You might have encountered situations where you wanted to find a book, but couldn't find it for a long time, or wanted to find the TV remote, but had no idea where you put it last time, taking a long time to find it. If you change your approach and organize your stuff after each use, everything becomes much easier. We tend to think that tidying up a desk or cleaning a room is a hassle, but these tasks reduce your future action costs. For example, after finishing work, you can organize your desk and put stationery in specific places so you'll immediately know where it is next time you need it. When you start working next time and see a tidy desk, you'll feel that everything is in order, and it'll also help improve your work efficiency. The second way to reduce resistance is the 2-minute rule. The author says that developing a new habit should take no more than 2 minutes. You might think that developing a habit shouldn't be about how long you persist, but how long you want to cultivate a reading habit. How many pages can you read in 2 minutes? At least half an hour, right? But you can change your mindset and read 2 pages in 2 minutes, which might be better. Think about it. Reading 2 pages is much easier than reading a whole book, but once you start reading, can you only read 2 pages? You'll always want to see what happens next, and as you read, you'll gradually get into it and even get absorbed. The 2-minute rule is to help ease your mental burden and make starting action easier. Any habit can be broken down into a 2-minute version. For instance, exercise can begin with 1 sit-up. Tidying up the kitchen can start with washing a dish. Running 3 kilometers can start with tying your shoelaces. Ultimately, developing a habit requires action. Once you start doing something, you'll often find yourself continuing to do it without realizing it. When should you stop? You should stop when you feel good. This may sound counterintuitive, as we think that the longer we stick with a habit, the better. Why stop when we're feeling good? Think back to how you feel when you're working on something successfully, but suddenly have to handle an urgent matter. Don't you want to finish that urgent matter quickly and return to what you were doing before? That's right, the previous thing becomes your anticipation. The great writer Hemingway also used this method for writing, stopping promptly when he was doing well. This way, even if he didn't have much inspiration the next day, he could continue writing along the previous lines, and as he wrote, he might spark new creative ideas. Now, we clearly know which habits we want to change, are willing to change, and have started acting. So, how can we make the new habit something we're willing to stick to? It's simple. Make it something pleasant. This is the final step in changing habits. Reward. On this note, let me share a true story. In the 1990s, Karachi, Pakistan's economic hub, had very poor sanitation, with more than half of its residents living in slums. The so-called houses were temporary structures made of old planks, coal slag bricks, and some waste materials, with garbage everywhere in the streets. Such unsanitary conditions, combined with a high population density, made people prone to all kinds of diseases. A sanitation worker named Stephen Luby recognized this public health crisis and found that washing hands, this simple action, could make people healthier. But people knew that hand washing was important, but they hadn't developed the habit. What to do? Luby came up with a way to provide residents with soap that was more foamy and smelled better. People found that washing their hands was no longer a hassle, but an enjoyable experience. More and more people gradually developed the habit of washing their hands. How do you turn a habit into something pleasant? The book also provides several methods, which can be summarized into one principle: make the feedback timely and visible. After completing a habitual action, reward yourself promptly, and it's best to make the benefits of these new habits visible. Our brains prefer short-term, certain returns. For example, if you want to develop the habit of financial management, you can keep accounts, and when you write down each expense and income, you'll see clearly how much you spent and saved each month. You can also track your habits, like journaling and checking in daily. As you see the dates, you know how long you've stuck with it, which will increase your sense of accomplishment and make you more willing to keep the habit. The author also specifically reminds us that it's okay to have interruptions. The key is to get back on track and continue. You need to overcome the idea of perfectionism, because what's important isn't each thing itself, but that you keep working in the right direction. To break a bad habit, the process is the opposite. You can make it something unpleasant. For instance, you can tell your friends about the consequences of your bad habit. After all, it's embarrassing to expose your problems in public. If you really don't want to admit to your bad habits, you can make a habit contract with yourself, and if you repeat the bad habit, give yourself a small penalty. Okay, that's the main content of the book, Atomic Habits. Let's summarize. The author believes that changing habits isn't as difficult as it seems, but rather we're using the wrong method. The better way to change habits isn't to set goals, but to focus on the system and improve every detail. Regarding cultivating habits, the author proposes a 4-step model: cue, craving, response, and reward. These 4 steps correspond to 4 action laws. Cues make habits more obvious. Cravings make habits more attractive. Responses make habits easier to perform. And rewards make sticking to habits enjoyable. Finally, the author particularly reminds us that the greatest threat to success isn't failure but boredom. When you repeat a behavior for too long and get tired of the habit, how can you keep yourself going? Actually, boredom is a signal to increase the difficulty. In psychology, there's a law called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which states that you have the most motivation when facing a challenge that's a bit difficult but manageable with some effort. In other words, if it's too difficult, you'll want to give up. And if it's too easy, you'll get bored. When you feel bored, it's a reminder to increase the difficulty. After reading this book, I want to share one personal insight. Changing habits isn't the goal, personal growth is the goal, and habits are just a tool. When you realize who you want to become, the change has already begun. All you need to do is take action and push for change, and habits will only help you save energy and make your actions easier. That's the essence of this book. You can click the description below the video to find the link to the book. Welcome to read it. You can also share this book with your friends. If you like the content of Daily Book Dive, click the subscribe button to stay updated. Your encouragement helps us continue bringing book essence to our community. Congratulations, you've finished another book.